Today we are staring at death right in the face in today's topic. So we know Hamlet's famous words, "to be or not to be," that is the question, has evolved into a statement, "I have the right to be or not to be." By taking God out of the equation, society finds itself in a lot of grey spaces, one of which is with regards to euthanasia and assisted suicide. So what is the media's view on all this? We'll start with the data they are presented. What percentage of people do you reckon agree with the statement, "It is acceptable for dementia sufferers to receive help to end their lives provided they consented before losing their mental capacity"? This was found from a survey held by Dignity in Dying, a charity campaigning for laws to change in the UK in favour for assisted suicide. And that was done in 2015. So it's interesting, but it could be biased considering where it came from. So now Parliament has been holding quite firmly to its opposition to assisted suicide and euthanasia so far. Critics believe it's mainly due to BMA's strong opposition, that's the British Medical Association. But the Royal College of Physicians has recently undertaken a survey in March 2019 with 7,000 doctors participating, and these were their options. So, the options were: they opposed the change in the law, they wanted the college to support a change for assisted suicide, or were neutral, and this was the result. So less than half agreed with the BMA's opposition to assisted suicide, with 43%. 32 supported the challenge to legalise assisted suicide, and 25 were neutral. And so the conclusion was that they were going to drop their 13-year opposition to assisted suicide for terminally ill patients, as they didn't reach the 60% majority. So this is getting quite serious, and it doesn't stop there. If you look at statistics in countries where it's been legalised, this is for Belgium, it's just increasing year on year. State of origin. Sorry, this one's for Belgium. The first was Netherlands. So you can just see the trend is just going up. And for suicide tourists, they call it, people traveling abroad to receive this treatment, it just slowly inches upwards. I don't know what's happening in Germany. But we need to remember who and what we are talking about here, and it's people. Human beings who agonize, suffer, worry, and bleed and die. People in immense pain. So we must never reduce these kinds of discussions to abstract, philosophical, theological debates. We should not go about these issues with rhetoric or philosophical judgment in our voices, but with tears in our eyes, recognizing the intense pain and agony. People such as Daniel James. He was a young rugby player who was paralysed from the chest down in training. He travelled to Switzerland to take his life in 2007 at the Dignitas clinic at the age of just 23 years old. He was praised for his decision, for being so willful and headstrong. His family was also celebrated for being brave and allowing him to choose his own fate above their own preferences. Tony Nicholson He suffered from a rare condition of locked-in syndrome after a stroke. He had fought to legally end his life by assisted suicide, took it to court and lost his case, filed for a plea, but was still refused. He ended up dying in natural causes in 2012 at the age of 58. Jeff Spector, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, an inoperable tumour on his spine, which would have led to paralysis. He decided to travel to Switzerland as he wanted to be in control of the final stages of his life. He died at the Dignitas clinic in 2015, before any of his conditions got any more serious. And there are many more cases. Debbie Prudy, she was in the media a lot, also fighting for assisted suicide. The Downs, they were a double suicide. And Noah Pasovian, she had suicidal thoughts, but highlighted how young a person can be to contact a clinic such as Dignitas. She died at 17 years old. But these are not issues outside in society, but in here in our own families and close-knit communities. You may have watched a loved one die in a painful and unpleasant way, or know of loved ones diagnosed with terminal conditions or painful, incurable diseases. You may have had suicidal thoughts of your own. This is an issue not just out there. They are issues which touch all of us because of our own humanity and our own fragility and vulnerability. And one of humanity's favourite ways to touch this fragility and vulnerability is through the arts, and especially movies. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Me Before You is a book adaptation inspired by the young rugby player Daniel James, and it has attempted to answer some very big questions. The story ends with the heroine travelling to Dignitas as he can no longer #live boldly. That was the catchphrase in advertising this movie. Even though he has fallen in love with his carer to give her the chance to also #live boldly. In contrast to similar real life stories, this movie was hit with a lot of criticism from the disabled community. Okay, so what comes next is a little bit unsettling. This, if you just type euthanasia into any search engine, this comes up. It's a bit weird, and it's extremely sinister. An artist designed this roller coaster that kills. The 500-meter drop puts the rider under 10 G-force, making the passenger pass out. The force is then maintained for a further 1 minute through 6 loops, as you can see from this image on the right, resulting in death by pure euphoria. And this was the aim and contemplation of the artist. So the aim is to take lives with elegance and euphoria. And his contemplation is, in the future, you might see it as an alternative euthanasia machine for future human beings, either for dealing with overpopulation, or if your life becomes too long. So you can just see how much of a slippery slope this topic can get. So before we dive into the topic, we need to take some time to look at the deceiving language being used to campaign and what certain phrases actually mean or represent. So what would you guys describe as a good death for yourself or for a loved one? So good death along with all these phrases, dignified death, as mentioned, relief of suffering, all suggest or allude to the killing or assisted killing of people. So campaigners are trying to sugarcoat something they know is going to be a hard pill to swallow for many to gain more support. So we need to distinguish between these three end-of-life situations. So first, let's look at what does euthanasia mean? Let's start off by saying that euthanasia is illegal in the UK. The word in Greek literally means good death, and it describes the active termination of a person's life on request. Assisted suicide, this is also illegal in the UK, and it describes to help someone kill themselves without doing the act itself. And if you're found guilty, you can be sentenced up to 14 years in prison. This includes assisting someone to travel abroad to a specialist clinic. And then there's common medical practice, which is legal. And that entails the right to refuse and withdraw futile treatment, or allow for larger doses of painkillers such as morphine, with the intention to alleviate pain, but recognizing that it may have damaging consequences. So let's have a look at the history and where the debate started and its legalization. So we'll begin with some ancient traditions. For many ancient civilizations, taking one's life was, as you can see, an act of bravery. It was heroic and a reasonable thing to do. So all these, the Buddhism, Hinduism in Japan, ancient Japan, Greece, Rome, they saw it as a heroic act, and it was only through Judeo-Christian influences that this attitude changed. So if we fast forward to Victorian England, suicide was established as a sin and a crime. If someone survived a suicidal act, they were put on trial until the law was later lifted with the Suicide Act in 1961. But Victorian England was also the time of enlightenment, and religion was taking a backseat, and society was looking to science for all the answers. Ignited by Darwin's Origins of Species, Samuel Williams published his essay titled Euthanasia, advocating the killing of suffering patients on request, and the modern debate began from here. The essay was followed up by Dr. Charles Goddard, who took it a step further to say it should be for those unable to enjoy life. The ideas were debated, but nothing really came from it. A few decades later, we see the rise of the Nazi regime. So this book, Permission for the Destruction of Worthless Life, by two German professors of medicine and law, advocated the termination of not only the terminally ill, but also the unconscious and incurable idiots, they describe them. Those suffering from incurable mental illnesses, described as unnecessary burden to society and economy. So with the Nazi Party in power, what was mere debate became a reality, starting with the sterilizations in 1933. and that saw 400,000 individuals sterilized at the end of World War II. Later, it came the Acton T4 program in 1939. So this program sought to make the book mentioned previously a reality. Killings were not restricted to willing adults, but midwives and doctors had a duty to report deformed babies and children to be terminated under this program. The big question post-war was how on earth were doctors and medical healthcare workers persuaded by this program? And it was quite simple. It was just due to the acceptance of the idea that there is such thing as a life not worth living. So as you can imagine, debates died down post World War II. So what's going on now? Here you can see where euthanasia and or assisted suicide has been legalized post-war. So Canada, a few states in America, Hawaii, a state in Australia, and a few in Europe. But I'd like to take a closer look at the Netherlands, Belgium, and state of Oregon. So the Netherlands, legalization, well, it started with the defense of necessity. So doctors taking the life of patients used this defense in court to say they were conflicted by their obligation to remove pain and suffering by killing, and his duty to prolong life as much as possible. In 2002, it was legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide by physicians for the terminally ill. But today, you no longer need to be terminally ill to have this treatment, and children as young as 12 can request euthanasia. So as you can see, it's about 4.5% of all deaths are recorded to die through euthanasia and assisted suicide. But there is a hidden number, 10% of all deaths in the Netherlands die of terminal sedation, which is not considered euthanasia or assisted suicide. And this entails the sedation of patients for days on end, so they're passed out with no food or fluids, resulting in death through dehydration and assisted suicide. So the intention is death and should be classed as euthanasia by omission. If we go to Belgium, again legalize the terminally ill and mentally ill patients to receive euthanasia and assisted suicide by a physician as well. And in 2004, this right was extended to 2014. This was extended to all ages, not just children. So if we go to Oregon, state of Oregon, so here euthanasia is not legal in the state, but assisted suicide medication can be prescribed by doctors for the terminally ill patients. You have to be 6 months terminally left to live. And the majority of countries that have legalized assisted suicide follow this idea, and campaigners in the UK are also asking for this kind of legalization. So let's have a look at why do people want to die this way, and what are the arguments for it? So the main two arguments in favour for legalisation of assisted suicide in the UK is the argument of compassion and autonomy. However, if we have a look at the data surveying why people have opted for assisted suicide in the state of Oregon in 2019, we see a slightly different story. 90% say it's less about it's because they are less able to engage in activities making life enjoyable. 97 because of loss of autonomy. 72 say loss of dignity. 59 because they've chosen this because it's otherwise it's a burden on family and friends. 39 because losing control of bodily functions, and 33 because inadequate or concerned for pain control. So actually, what is the root cause of this debate is fear. But first, let's take a look at these arguments. The oldest argument in favour has been that of compassion. Lord George Carey, and former Archbishop of Canterbury, is quoted saying, "When suffering is so great that some patients make repeated pleas to die, it seems a denial of that loving compassion which is the hallmark of Christianity, to refuse to allow them to fulfill their own clearly stated request." Jasper Conran, he's a fashion designer, also supported the movement, saying that we put down our pets as the humane thing, so why should we not do the same for humans when they also fall ill? Reverend Paul Badham uses 1 Corinthians 13 to teaching that to assist dying is to love, and Jesus's golden rule, that is to do unto others as you would have done unto you. But what is this argument essentially saying? I am such a caring person that I have to help you kill yourself. In the name of eliminating the suffering, we are forced to eliminate the sufferer. So is this really the loving thing to do? But with today's medical advances, we have the technology and expertise to be able to relieve physical pain safely. So this argument has been slipping away. The argument of autonomy is becoming the main driver in this debate. Sir Terry Pratchett, he's a famous British writer. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and was considering assisted suicide before dying of natural causes. And he campaigned for the legalisation in the UK. This was his argument. I believe that any individual should have the right to choose the time and the conditions of their death. This argument is backed by Sir Patrick Stewart, famous actor, and Christian religious figure Desmond Tutu. But if we look at the conditions and all the must-be's, you wonder, where is the autonomy? So the kind of argument falls apart on its own. But more importantly, what kind of society are we encouraging with this attitude? We should let anyone who says they want to die rather than help them through their suffering. And then I'd like to have a look at fear. But as we saw from the state of Oregon's statistics, it's a deep seated fear that is fueling this debate. And it's in 3 categories. The first is the fear of total pain. This is not just of the physical, but emotional, relational, and spiritual pain. Fear of indignity, to feel that they are no longer who they are and therefore less than human. The fear of dependence, fear of being incapacitated and a burden to the family and community, and losing that independence. So how can we address these arguments and fears and actually find a way to die well? Looking at the Christian response, I've broken it down into 3 basic and fundamental questions, which society has been grappling with since God is no longer in the equation. For example, 3 TED Talks give you 3 different answers for what it is to be human. Creative, happy, cultured, what is it? Freedom is also a question. Is it today it's to break free from oppressive religious traditions and rules to truly be yourself. And suffering no longer has a meaning or a place in society, and so must be eliminated at all costs. So what is the Christian answer to all these questions? So for the first, this question is answered in the first book of the Bible. To be human is to be God's image. To be human is to be a reflection of God's mysterious being. And so to kill is to take one's life. So to kill is, or to take one's life, is particularly significant because it is a direct desecration of God's own image. This in turn answers what of a life that is no longer worth living due to unforeseen diseases, as seen in previous cases. So take this Michelangelo painting, or his famous Moses sculpture in Rome, and say it broke into a million pieces. Is it no longer worth anything? No, it is still worth so much, and art historians will do all they can to fix it, no matter what it takes or how much it costs. Not because a piece of marble is broken or a painting is destroyed, but because it's a Michelangelo. Similarly, our life is worth living, not because of our talents, our DNA, or physical abilities, but because it's a Michelangelo. It is the work of God himself. Our next question, what is freedom? I am the master of my own fate, proclaimed William Hamley, and so many others after him. I do what I like and what makes me happy, so to hell with what anyone else says or thinks. Non-believers pity us for following apparently rigid rules and orders from a higher being and saying we are chained. But this is a misunderstanding of what it means to be truly free. To live by the hidden grain of the created moral order is to be free. For example, if we take this fish on screen that wants to be set free from the water and has managed to escape, is it now free? No, it is dead. If the fish is to stay in water, is it free or is it trapped? It is free to do as it pleases, but in order for it to be free, it must follow the order of creation. And as Peter says, live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. So what does it mean to suffer? So now suffering is a whole topic in and of itself, but here we'll just be concerned with individual suffering. The word itself means to bear under, to accept or to allow. Everyone is going to go through tough times, some more than others, but it is part of our reality that we must allow. It is a reality that challenges our modern tendencies to be control freaks. One of the reasons why a secular world does not see any benefit in suffering is because it highlights how important it is to depend on one another. Suffering isn't always something we need to get rid of or eliminate from our lives, but something we must accept and comfort others through. It demands a presence, not a solution. So the 3 questions wrap up into the narrative of human life. If we look at the basic life cycle of people, we are born as entirely dependent beings. As we grow up, we see others depend on us. As we progress in age, we find we must depend on others once again. It is the cycle of life. It is how we have been designed. This is not only applicable on immediate family and friends, but on the whole society. To be independent is an illusion. Think about all the different people it took to get you into this specific point in time. How many hands has your device been through to get to you right this second? The chair you are sitting in, the pen you are holding. To accomplish this point in time, you have required the cooperation of hundreds of people. To depend on someone or a community should by no means be a fear or something to be ashamed of, but a commandment we must obey. As in Galatians, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So we'll look at palliative care. So how can we put this into practice? So this care and dependence and vulnerability and suffering has been integrated in society through palliative care. This kind of care was established by this lady here in this picture, Dame Cicely Saunders. She's the main reason why assisted suicide has not been legalised in the UK up till this day. Cicely Saunders was a Christian convert working as a nurse for terminal cancer patients, trained as a social worker before training as a doctor, and set up a holistic care for end-of-life treatment. So this palliative care of the dying patient intends to neither accelerate the death process nor impede it. It is instead to allow death to occur naturally and to concentrate on using the last few hours and days and weeks to the maximum. This was her motto: you matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. So she did this by addressing that first fear of total pain. Physical aspects were dealt with through the right balance of safe painkillers. Relationships were restored and contacted on behalf of patients. Emotional comfort was addressed through talking therapy, counselling and friendship. And the spiritual comfort was restored. The first hospice was St. Christopher's in Surrey, designed with a chapel in the centre, so all the beds could easily be wheeled in at any stage of their illness. So to conclude this section, what does it mean to die well and faithfully? It is a reflection of how to live faithfully. If you think about it, it can actually be an adventure and a time to be closer to God. A time for focusing on other matters, saying sorry, and reconciled with relationships. Receiving a fresh grace and forgiveness of God. Fulfilling dreams that we may have not accomplished, relinquishing tasks which are no longer a priority, learning new lessons from God. Passing on to my loved ones the deepest concerns of my heart, the importance of the last few words someone says on their deathbed, encouraging those who remain to serve that faith faithfully in society. And lastly, and most important one, a time for preparing in faith, hope and love to meet our Creator and Redeemer face to face. So if I were to summarize in just a couple lines, the death of human beings is not to be welcomed or hastened. Death is an enemy which we must fight against. but also by God's grace, death is also a strange kind of healing and a gateway to a new reality. And so my sources, John Watt, he's written two amazing books. If you don't have time to read them, he's got an hour-long talk on YouTube. BBC have done kind of the other side of the argument, two documentaries there following assisted suicide patients. And that concludes my presentation.